The purpose of the shir is to try to define the two parts of Purim. One is the night of Purim, and the other is the day of Purim. And that makes Purim very different in the constellation of Moadim and Yomim Tovim, because in Moadim, Yomim Tovim, and Shabbos, of course, the night and the day are one entity. But here in the case of Purim, we're going to split between the night and the day. That's going to be my theory. I couldn't find anyone to support me, but I think I have a very clear right from the Pnei Yoshua. Where does this all come from? Really, it comes from a Gemara on Daf Zayin in Masechta Megillah, and the Gemara is quoting Rava on Daf Zayin Amid Beis, and Rava in turn is based on a pasuk in Perek Tes Mimegillas Esther, pasuk Chaf Beis. Now, if you can open up to pasuk Chaf Beis, and if not, maybe you'll hear it as Torah Shebal Peh. There's one key word in the pasuk that gives Rava the ability to build mountains on this one word. The word has only 3 letters to it. And in defining the day of Purim, the pasuk says, Lasos osam yemei mishte v'simcha mishloach manos. I'm going to read it again. Yemei mishte v'simcha u'mishloach manos. So Rava in Megillah Daf Zayin Amid Beis applies the classic, shall I call it biblical exegesis to the word Yemei, and that is Yom v'lo Laila. For example, if any of you are doing Daf Yomi, just a few days ago, we were speaking about tefillin and whether there's a mitzvah of tefillin at night, and it says Yomim. Yomim v'lo Leila. So Rava, using that same methodology of drasha, comes to the conclusion that if you, for example, eat a Sudas Purim at night, let's say tomorrow night would be Leil Yudalid, Lo Yatsi Yedecho Vaso, because the Torah said, the pasuk says, you may Mishtev v'simcha, referring to the Seudah, and it says Yemei, and it's got to be by day. Now, at this point, I want to introduce, before we get back to an earlier pasuk Yud Tes, and a Gemara in Megillah Daf Hey Amid Beis from Rav Yosef, I want to introduce the Turi Even, same author as the Shagas Aryeh, which is almost the same identical name that Bibi calls this current campaign. And the Shagas Aryeh writes in his work on Masechta Megillah, which is called the Turi Even, that Rav is teaching us that the night of Purim is not Purim. Hence, you can't fulfill the mitzvah of Purim, which is Sudas Purim, at night. And Rav is justified to draw that conclusion, to exclude the night of Purim, based on the pasuk Yemei, Yomim v'lo Leilos. And this is going to lead the Turi Even to problems, as we're going to see soon. But first, let's learn the Sugya of Rav Yosef in Masechta Megillah on Daf Hey Amid Beis. And Rav Yosef is quoting a different pasuk in the same chapter of Megillas Esther, that's Perek Tes, but he's building himself on pasuk Yud Tes. So we're going back 3 psukim from Chaf Beis back to Yud Tes. And Rav Yosef says the following, that in pasuk Yud Tes, the Tanakh defines the day of Purim with 3 terms. Term number 1 is Simcha. Number 2, Mishteh. And number 3, Yom Tov. Now keep in mind that phrase Yom Tov appears in Pasuk Yutes and not in Pasuk Chav Beis. On the other hand, in Pasuk Chav Beis we have the word Yemei, which is omitted in Pasuk Yutes. But in any event, from the perspective of the Turi Even, once Rava on Daf Zayin Amid Beis darshans that these days are Yemei Mishteh V'Simcha, Yamim V'lo Leilos, hence you cannot be Yotzei the mitzvah of Sudas Purim at night, says the Turi Even, I have to now fast forward and apply that to the halacha of Mishteh V'Simcha. Because the Gemara says in the name of Rav Yosef on Daf Amid Beis that Mishteh is going to teach me an Iser Tainus, and Simcha is going to teach me an Iser Hesped. So tragically, as you know, a large number of people in a great catastrophe from Iran, the Rishonim that died here in Beit Shemesh, probably a 10-minute drive from here, will be buried. I don't know exactly when they're going to bury them because of complications of burial, but let's say if things would be done the way they do it in Yerushalayim, they bury you at night. So let's say, for example, tomorrow night they would bury the dead, and tomorrow night they would want to give a hesped at the funeral. Rav Yosef derives from the pasuk Simcha that there won't be any hesped tomorrow night. And the reason for that is because a hesped is meant to bring out grief and mourning, which is antithetical to simcha. And since the day is called the day of simcha, hence it prohibits hesped. Not only that, but let's say we have something called a tainus show. So let's say a person would accept upon himself tomorrow night a tainus shows for the 12 hours at the beginning of Purim. Again, that would be very difficult unless he broke his fast from Tainus Esther. But let's say he would do such a thing, and he wants to take upon himself a Tainus on Purim. So the Pasuk says in Pasuk Yutes that these are days of Mishteh. And Mishteh means we have to drink and be merry. And we can't do that on a Tainus because the Tainus prohibits Achilu Shasiyah, and it's a solemn experience. Now there's a third phrase which Rav Yosef points out and derives a conclusion from in Pasuk Yutes, and that's the phrase V'Yom Tov. Says Rav Yosef, Yom Tov means Iser Malacha. And this is what Mordechai sent to the Jewish people initially, to accept upon themselves on Purim an Iser Malacha. However, the Gemara points out later on that the people did not accept, they accepted upon themselves Simcho Mishteh, but not Iser Malacha. That they weren't willing to accept. Comes along the Turi Even, and he says that if you're going to derive the Iser of Hesped and Tainus from the definition of Purim as a day of Simcho Mishteh, then according to Rava, if we go back to Rava and Daf Zayin Amid Beis and the pasuk in Megillas Esther Tes pasuk Chav Beis, that Iser of Hesped v'Tainus is only going to apply during the day of Purim, because pasuk Chav Beis, as Rava derives it, adds the word Yemei, and Yemei means the exclusion of Lila. So says the Turi Even, it should come out now according to the Cheshbon that you're allowed to accept upon yourself a tainus at night of Purim, or be maspid the dead on the night of Purim, and the Iser tainus and Hesped would only be chal on the day of Purim, because Yemei Simcha Umishteh are Yomim and not Leilos, meaning, according to Turi Even's Cheshbon, to the same extent that you have a halach of Rava that dictates that there's no Sudas Purim at night, but only during the day, meaning the day of Mishteh and Simcha is during the day and not at night, so too, argues the Turi Even, the Iser Hesped V'Tainis, which is derived from those two words of Simcha Umishte, would only be relevant during the day. Hence, there would be no Iser Tainis or Hesped at night, because Purim is during the day. Harayat says Yemei Purim. Furthermore, the Turi Even asks another kasha, and he says the following, that if Purim only applies by day, as Rava derives it from the miyut, the exclusion of Yemei in Pasuk Chaf Beis, therefore, when Klal Yisrael were commissioned by Mordechai to accept the day of Purim as a day of Iser Malacha, then that Iser Malacha, which Mordechai wanted to impose and the people did not accept it, was only during the day. And there was never, so to speak, a havamina in anyone's mind that there would be an Iser Malacha at night. Meaning, even if Klal Yisrael would have accepted the Iser Malacha, it would have only been Chal during the day, because we have the miyut of Yemei that excludes the night from Purim. And therefore, to the same extent that there's no Sudas Purim at night, there would be no Iser Malacha at night, even if Klal Yisrael had accepted the mandate of Mordechai, of Yom Tov, to the exclusion of Malacha, to prohibit Malacha. And the Turi Even, in a very long presentation, proves that this is not right at all, and that even if Klal Yisrael had accepted the Iser Malacha as Mordechai had formulated, it would be Chal at night as well. And this is based on a Yushalmi. Again, I don't think we have time now to go through the Yushalmi, but you'll have to take my word for it. Now, I want to add another bunch of kashas over here. One is from a sefer called Emek Bracha. The Emek Bracha, his name is Rabbi Aryeh Pomeranchik. He died about, I would say about 40 years ago. He quotes a Rambam in the second chapter of Hilchas Megillah, and the Rambam writes that at the Sudas Purim, it's not enough to drink wine, it's not enough to eat meat, but you have to have both achilas basar and shesias yayin. You need both of them. And he asks the following kasha. With regard to simcha on Yontif, one or the other suffices. Either ain't simcha b'basar, and that would suffice, and you fulfill the mitzvah of simchas Yontif by eating basar, or alternatively, ain't simcha below yayin, and you can fulfill the mitzvah of simchas Yontif with yayin. Why is it then that on Seudas Purim, the Rambam establishes that you need A, basar, and B, yayin? My wife asked me if chicken is also included. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. I think the Rambam used the word basar deliberately. So in any event, it comes out like this, that as far as a Sudas Yontif is concerned, you have a choice of fulfilling Simchas Yontif in your Seudah with either meat or wine, but the Rambam in Hilchas Megillah with regard to Sudas Purim requires both yayin and basar. How could that be? How could it be that the Sudas Purim is more chamor than a Sudas Yontif? Now we want to add another question from the Brisker Rav. The Brisker Rav says, the Gemara establishes chayav inish l'psumei ad lo yoda, that at the Sudas Purim we have to be intoxicated, whatever that means. And yet, we don't find such a Suda on Yontif. We never found that on Yontif there's a chiyuv of chayav inish l'psumei ad lo yoda. So how could it be, again, that Purim has a chiyuv Seudah that doesn't parallel and reflect anything in Yontif? Now, add to this one or two more questions. Question on the Rav Yah. The Mordechai quotes the Rav Yah to the effect that at night of Purim you have to eat a Suda. And the Mordechai raises the following objection. The Gemara says that if you eat Sudas Purim at night, Rava derives from the pasuk Yemei Mishteh V'Simcha, that you're not Yotze. You have to be Yotze Sudas Purim by day. So I don't understand, says the Mordechai. How could the Rav Yos say that we have a mitzvah of Suda at night when clearly Rava says the mitzvah of Suda is by day? And then we get to the question of the Pnei Yoshua. The Pnei Yoshua asks the following. Tosfos is of the opinion that we recite Shechiyanu twice, once at night and the other time during the day when we read the Megillah. Says the Pnei Yoshua, I understand very well why we're going to recite Shechiyanu by day, because the halacha is that when you have a mitzvah that comes mizman luzman, and it's a rare mitzvah, you have to wait till it's time, like for example, lulav and matzah and so forth and so on, we'll recite Shechiyanu v'kimonu v'gyanu lezman ezeh. Fine. Now, Tosfos says that the Ikar mitzvah Megillah is during the day, which makes sense because we've already established that if you ate a Sudas Purim at night, Rava says you may mishtav simcha, you aren't Yotze. So it means that Purim is by day. And if Purim is by day, the Megillah is by day. And the Rishonim all try to work out why do we read the Megillah at night. And basically they say it's like a preparation for the day, but it's not really the mitzvah Megillah. So it comes out that the Shechiyanu by day is on the new mitzvah of Megillah. So why do we make a Shechiyanu at night? Because Rabbeinu Tam says you make a Shechiyanu not only during the day, but at night. Says the Pnei Yoshua, what's the Shechiyanu at night? Now, I would like to add one kind of small technical question before we try to put this all into some order. If you take a look, again, if you have the Megillah in front of you, to Pasuk Yutes, when the Pasuk defines the day of Purim, it defines it as Simcha u'Mishteh. Notice the sequence. Simcha comes first, and Mishteh comes second. Now fast forward 3 Psukim to Pasuk Chav Beis, and there Purim is defined as Yemei Mishteh v'Simcha. And the sequence is Punkt Vaker. Why change the sequence of Simcha u'Mishteh? To answer all these questions, I would like to suggest the following. And I believe that no one says this. So you're the jury, and you will have to decide. There's no kfiyat datit over here. We're very liberal and democratic, and we allow you to accept and reject whatever you like. I would like to suggest that the Turi Even, Lefi Aniyas Daiti, made a mistake. What do I mean he made a mistake? He took Pasuk Yutes and Pasuk Chav Beis and integrated them into one sholent. I would like to suggest, Lefi Aniyas Daiti, that Pasuk Yutes and Pasuk Chav Beis are addressing two different dimensions of Purim. And the proof is that in Pasuk Yutes, the Pasuk defines the day as a Yontif. That does not appear in Pasuk Chav Beis. And furthermore, in Pasuk Chav Beis we find Yemei Purim, and the emphasis here is on Yom, and not Laila, as we saw in Rava's drasha that you're not Yotzei Sudas Purim at night. Whereas in Pasuk Chav Yutes, there's no mention of Yemei Mishteh v'Simcha. So now, I'm tempted to want to draw the following conclusion, that in Pasuk Yutes, we're talking about Yontif, and accepting Purim as a Yontif, and that status of Purim as a Yontif begins at night and carries over to the day. Yontif is a 24-hour, what's the word I want to use? A 24-hour episode, or 24-hour institution, whatever word you'll come up with. We have a principle with regard to Yontif, Leilo Kiyomo. The night is the same as the day. And if this be the case, then when we fast forward to Pasuk Chav Beis, which omits the word Yontif, and only has the word Yemei, we're not addressing Purim as a Yontif. Pasuk Chav Beis doesn't have Purim as a Yontif. And therefore Pasuk Chav Beis is going to exclude Laila. Because if Purim was a Yontif, it would have to include Laila because of the principle of Leilo Kiyomo. Elamai, Pasuk of Beis is talking about a mitzvah miyuchedes of Purim that has nothing to do with Yontif. It goes way beyond Yontif. So therefore, when it comes to the Rav Yah, who says that you have to eat a Suda at night on the Leil Yudalid, he's talking from the perspective of Pasuk Yutes. What do I mean by Pasuk Yutes? Pasuk Yutes establishes a status of Yontif on Purim. Yontif includes Laila, and as such, the Rav Yah writes that on Leil Purim, Leil Yudalid, you set up your table, Orech es HaShulchan, and he breaks bread, he eats pas, as he would do on every Yontif. And Purim has a status, midrabanan, of course, of a Yontif, like Yontif Sheni Shel Golios is a Yontif D'Rabbanan. It's a Yontif Midivrei Sofrim. But as such, as a Yontif Midivrei Sofrim, we have a status of Yontif at night. And that status of Yontif at night, A, will obligate us in a Suda, so claims the Rav Yah. The Rav Yah admits that it's not a Suda Chashuva, it's just a Suda's Yontif, meaning it's a Suda of Aricha Shulchan and Achilas Pas. But nevertheless, it's a Chiyuv Suda. So tomorrow night, Amir Hashem, we'll eat a Suda, and we should have in mind that it's a Suda's Yontif, because Leilo Kiyomo, and the night is included in the Yontif of Purim. Hence, in Pasuk Yutes, which speaks about Purim as a Yontif, we start at the nighttime, and we have a Laila. And this, I believe, will answer the question of the Pnei Yoshua. How can we make Shechianu at night if the new mitzvah of Megillah is by day? What's the point to a Shechianu at night? And the answer is, Shechianu v'kimonu v'giyonu l'zman hazeh, this is man of a Yontif on Purim. And if you'll ask me, what's the difference between Shechianu at night and Shechianu by day? Shechianu at night would be like, let's say, Shechianu in Kiddush on Leil Sukkos, but then we're going to make another Shechianu on the day of Sukkos when we take the Lulav for the first time. And in a parallel way, we're going to make a Shechianu on the night of Purim, with or without a Megillah, it doesn't make a difference, on the Zman and the Yontif, the Chal Shem Yontif of Purim, and then we'll have to make another Shechianu by day for the new mitzvah Megillah, because the new mitzvah Megillah belongs to Pasuk Chav Beis, which has the word Yemei Mishteh, which means that Purim is by day, meaning the unique mitzvos of Purim are only by day, and therefore, by day, you have a new mitzvah called Kriyas HaMegillah, and that generates a Chiyuv Shechianu. On top of that, I'm going to tell you that there's an Iser Hesped V'Tainis on the night of Purim, because Leilo Kiyom, it's a Yontif. The Yontif begins at night, and Yontif doesn't allow Hesped or Tainis. Hesped and Tainis are antithetical to the Simcha of Yontif. Simcha of Yontif requires that you eat and don't fast. The Simcha of Yontif requires that you be in a jubilant state of celebration, not in a state of solemn grief and mourning as generated by a Hesped, and therefore the Iser Hesped V'Tainis will be Chal at night. You'll tell me Purim doesn't start till the day. No, the Yontif of Purim starts at night. And even though you'll ask me, but there's no Iser Malacha on Purim, how can you tell me that Purim is a Yontif? The answer is as follows. Mordechai wanted to persevere on the Jewish people that they should accept Purim as a Yontif. The Jewish people said thanks, but no thanks. Thanks, I will accept, as you pleaded with us, to accept Purim as a Yontif. Yes, Purim is a Yontif. But don't tell me that it's also b'malacha. Meaning, we're going to have a Yontif with a heter malacha. Where do we have such a thing? Rabbi Berzon, are you off your rocker? A Yontif with a heter malacha? The answer is Chol HaMoed. According to most Rishonim, Chol HaMoed on a Doraisa level is mutar b'malacha, and yet it's a Yontif. How do I know it's a Yontif? Because my Rebbe once asked his grandfather, Reb Chaim Brisker, why is it that you don't wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed? After all, the Ramah paskins that you wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed. And I don't know if I ever told you this. I was down in Miami Beach. Actually, it's called North Miami Beach on Chol HaMoed. I think it was Chol HaMoed. Not sure. It was Chol HaMoed Sukkos. And they have a takana in that Young Israel in North Miami Beach that if you don't wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed, you can't be Ola L'Shatz. You can't be the Shliach Tzibur. So I was already excluded. But not only that, I looked around at the people. I would say about 60% of the people in the audience were not wearing tefillin. Anyway, Reb Chaim didn't wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed. So my Rebbe asked him, Zayda, why don't you're always machmir for all the shittas. The Ramah says you have to wear tefillin. Maybe you're following the minhag of Volozhin Yeshiva. The Gaon's minhag was in Volozhin not to wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed. Said Reb Chaim Nein, has nothing to do with the minhag of Volozhin. I myself came to the conclusion that you cannot wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed because Chol Hamoed has a kedushas yontif with a heter malacha. All right, the Torah allowed malacha, but it is kadosh b'kedushas yontif like any day of yontif. Yontif and its chalos kedushas and os is chal on all 7 days, and therefore there's no tefillin even on Chol Hamoed. So we have here a case of a precedent for something that has a chalos shem yontif, but nevertheless, it does not generate an Isur Malach because there's a Heter Malacha. It's like if you've seen in Shas, as you're traveling through Shas, you may have seen a phrase that repeats itself very often called Hutar Mechlolo, meaning it's Asur, but there's a special Heter. And this is what I want to say about Purim, that because the people of Israel did not accept the Isur Malacha, there was a special Heter to do Malacha. But they did accept Purim as a yontif. Hence, there'd be an Isur Hesped V'Tainus in the night of Purim. And not only that, as we said before in the Pnei Yoshua, we'll make a Shechiyanu on the yontif at night of Purim. Now, we fast forward to Pasuk of Beis. Pasuk of Beis mentions Yemei Mishtev Purim. Yemei meaning Yomim. Yomim v'lo leilos. And therefore, Rava derives the conclusion you cannot be yotzi the mitzvah of Sudas Purim by night. You have to do it by day. Why? Because as far as Purim, qua Purim is concerned, Purim has a separate mitzvah of Purim above and beyond Yontif. That's only by day. In other words, Purim as a Yontif starts at night and extends for a full 24 hours. But Purim as Purim, with all its mitzvos miyuchados, the special mitzvahs of Purim, that's only by day. Hence, you can only be yotzi the Sudas Purim by day, you can't be yotzi at night. Because the Sudas Purim is not generated by the Shem Yontif, but rather by the Shem Purim. And Purim is by day. And that's why the Pasuk of Beis says Yemei Yomim V'lo Leilos. And therefore, we can answer the question of the Emek Bracha, Rav Pomeranchik. Why is it that on Purim the Rambam writes you have to eat meat and drink wine? It's not enough as you would do it on Yontif, one or the other. The answer is because on the day of Purim we have a new Chiyuv Seudah, which goes way beyond the Chiyuv Seudah of Yontif. At night, for example, going into Purim tomorrow night, you can have meat or you can drink wine. You don't need to do both because that's Purim as a Yontif. But when we get to the day, now what emerges is a separate Shem Purim with its own unique mitzvos and chiyuvim that go beyond that of Yontif. And here, we're going to require at the Sudas Purim both basar and yain. Not only that, we can answer up the Kasha of the Brisker Rav. How is it that on Purim, at the Suda, we have a chiyuv of Adlo Yada, something that we don't find on any Suda of Yontif? The answer is because we're talking about a unique mitzvah of Suda, of Purim, that emerges by the day, and that generates a chiyuv of mishteh and simcha that doesn't identify with that of Yontif. Meaning on Yontif, you don't need Ad Lo Yoda. On Purim, there's a special chiyuv in the Suda of Ad Lo Yoda. And now perhaps we can answer up the sequence of simcha u'mishteh, as opposed to mishteh v'simcha. In Pasuk Yutes, when we're describing the Yontif, we start with Simcha. Why? Because the halacha, and the status of Purim as a Yontif is Dumya, is parallel, Magbil, right, as we say in Hebrew, to Yontif Bialma, every Yontif. And therefore we start with Simcha. From Simcha, we move on to Mishteh. And those concepts apply to every Yontif and will apply to Leil Purim. We'll make a Shechiyot, as we said, on the emergence of Leil Purim as Yontif, and we'll have an Isur Hesped and an Isur Tainus on Leil Purim. All that is Purim B'Toras Yontif with a Shechiyanu, and it's going to be parallel to a Yontif. We don't need a Suda Chashuva with Adelo Yoda, Yayin plus Basar, and it's called Simcha U Mishta. Now we fast forward to Pasuk of Beis, and now we're talking about the day of Purim, because it says Yimei, and all the unique mitzvahs, special mitzvahs of Purim are by day. And now we're going to start with Mishta and then end with Simcha. Because Mishta is going to tell me that this is a brand new Mishta that doesn't equal the Mishta of Yontif, and therefore the Simcha is generated by Mishta. Now, just to wrap things up, if you followed the presentation, I want to ask a question that really disturbed my mind. I thought I had everything in its place, everything fit beautifully, except when I looked again at Pasuk Yutes, I found something that seems to undermine everything we said. Because the Pasuk defines Purim not only as Simcha U Mishta V'Yom Tov, but also as Mishloach Manos Ish L'Reyehu. What is that Mishloach Manos doing over here in Pasuk Yutes? If our claim is correct, that Pasuk Yutes addresses Purim as a Yontif, then, Jerry, the Purim as a Yontif, then what's Mishloach Manos? So I found something amazing in the Torah T'mima. Now, I don't usually quote the Torah T'mima, it's not my style. But if I need it, I'll quote it. And here I could use the Torah T'mima. The Torah T'mima has a Gemara in Beitza, and the Gemara in Beitza tells us that on Yontif we should be sending Mishloach Manos. Did you ever hear such a thing? I never heard such a thing. And therefore, the Gemara quotes a pasuk in Ezra. I'll read to you the pasuk. The pasuk in Ezra says the following. I'm almost there. Give me one more second. Oh, the pasuk says the following. This is in Perek Ches. It says, "V'shilchu manos li'ein nachon lo, ki kadosh hayom ladonenu." Now, ki kadosh hayom ladonenu means it's a day that's endowed with Kiddush Hayom. Take, for example, Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is endowed with the Kiddush Hayom. And Ezra mandates, shilchu manos, send food. To whom? To ein nachon lo, to those who maybe don't have enough money to buy food. They should also participate and fulfill the mitzvah of Simchas Yontif. So therefore, if you have enough food and more, send some of your surplus food to an ein nachon lo, someone who doesn't have it, so that he too can fulfill the mitzvah of Simcha by eating these manos. And the Gemara in Beitza, based on this pasuk, establishes that we should be sending manos to poor people on Yontif, every Yontif. The Gemara is not talking about Purim. Now, based on this insight, perhaps we can justify why in pasuk Yutes the pasuk adds Mishloach Manos Ish L'Reyehu. Again, we're going to have to say that Re'ehu here means a special Re'ehu. It's a Re'ehu that needs you as a friend to reach out and help him set up a Su'udas Yontif because he's poor. In the case of Pasuk Chaf Beis, there we're talking about Yemei Purim, meaning Yom and not Laila. So we're no longer talking about Purim as a Yontif, we're talking about the special mitzvah of Purim. And here on the day, it's not enough that you sent Mishloach Manos on the night for Yontif, you have to send Mishloach Manos on the day as well because of the unique mitzvahs of Purim that are chal by day. And here, in order that we understand that that unique mitzvah of Purim is Re'ehu, meaning your friend who might be wealthy, therefore the pasuk adds Umatonos Levyonim. So you have two categories and two mitzvahs on the day of Purim of Mishloach Manos number one, and that's Ish L'Re'ehu, even if your Re'ehu is well-to-do, he doesn't need you. And number two, Matonos Levyonim. But if we go back to Pasuk Yutes and we're talking about the night of Purim as a yontif, then the Pasuk is talking about yontif. And there Mishloch Manos Ish L'Re'eu is meant to be understood as Re'eu Ein Nachal Lo in the language of Ezra, meaning he who is poor. So therefore, on the night of Purim, we should be sending manos to he who is poor. On the day, we send manos to Re'ehu and Matanos Levyonim. So just to summarize, we have a number of nafkaminas that are derived from our definition of Purim as a yontif. Although the mitzvahs miyuchados, the special mitzvahs that go beyond yontif, of Seuda, of Vishloch Manos, and Matanos Evyonim, of Kriyas HaMegillah, all those are only chal by day, because the day is Purim and not the night. But as far as Yontif is concerned, they accepted the Chal Hashem Yontif at night, Leilo Kiyomo. Nafkamina number one is the Rav Yo says you have to eat a Suda on the night of Purim, and that Suda is not a Suda Chashuva with Yayin plus Basar, but one of the two is enough on Yontif, and there's no Adelo Yoda. Number two, on the night of Purim, we'll recite Shechiyanu because that Shechiyanu is on the Yontif of Purim, and Leilo Kiyomo, Yontif of Purim emerges at night. Number three, we're going to have an Isur Tainus at night because the Torah describes the Yontif of Purim at night as a day of Mishteh. Mishteh is antithetical to Tainus. Number four, we'll have an Afkamina that at night we'll have an Isur Hesped because Pasuk Yutes, which defines Purim as a yontif, and that yontif is chal at night, has the word simcha in it, and simcha and hesped are mutually exclusive because hesped is to create a feeling of grief. So all these nafkaminos, and the fact that your Suda at night is not a Suda of Purim, but rather a Suda of Yontif, without Adelo Yoda, without requiring both Yayin and Mishteh, and Yayin and Basar. All this is because they did accept what Mordechai wanted to accept, namely that this day should be a Yontif. There's a Heter Malacha. We found a precedent for that in Chol HaMoed, if you recall, a Heter Malacha. But the essence of Purim is a day of Yontif. And that's why in Pasuk Yutes, Purim is described as a Yontif. And we will recite on this new Zman of Yontif at night of Purim as Shechiyanu. And it has nothing to do with the Megillah per se. It has something to do with the day of Purim as a day of Yontif. And therefore, the Pasuk starts by describing the day as a day of Simcha, because again, the common denominator between Purim as a yontif, which starts at night, and any yontif is the fact that it's a day of simcha. So the chi of simcha is chal even on Purim, as it is on yontif, by virtue of the fact that they accepted Purim as a yontif, and that includes Leilo Kiyom. That answers up all the kashas of the Turei. So I'll take this opportunity to thank you for coming and joining me at the last minute with the Zoom. I would have actually publicized the Zoom much earlier, but I had some technological problems with what's called a broadcast. In any event, I hope you were able to follow. I know it's a late hour and, we're all cooped up here. But you know what? Maybe our Torah should be a little bit of a help to wish that HaKadosh Baruch Hu spare us of all these terrible tragedies that we're hearing about. And we should be zocheh to bsorot tovot, to hear better news, protection from Shamayim, and on top of that, I want to wish you a Simchas Purim, both as a Yontif and the special day of Purim with all its unique mitzvahs. Purim Sameach. Thank you so much.
Amen. Amen. Toda.
Man, thank you.
Sameach.